Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, are genetically modified foods or GMOs safe to eat? Many scientists around the world say they are, so why does such strong opposition to GMOs still exist? So you may remember a couple of weeks ago we had a Stream Science open editorial, a mass brainstorming session. The viewers, our online community, they all suggested science ideas that we should be doing on this show. This entire week of Stream Science is all because of how you helped us brainstorm. Today, GMOs, we're going back to the origin of that idea. Malika has it on her laptop.
Yes, ending the week with our very first pitch in the open editorial. And it came from Al Jazeera's Phil Torres of Techno. Have a listen to what he pitched.
Things like GMOs and chemicals and other parts of the human diet that won't either kill us or save us. And one of the big issues I see is this idea of scientific literacy in our diets. And it just seems like our findings of what is healthy and what is not healthy are kind of confusing. Figuring out ways to, just talk about these issues calmly and clearly and just really getting to the bottom of what are GMOs.
Calmly and clearly. We'll see if that happens in today's show. We want your help. You can tweet us with hashtag AJStream. And in the meantime, here are some of the other Stream Science stories that you've shared with us.
When it comes to what you eat, the term genetically modified seems to freak a lot of people out. But according to 88% of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, there's no cause for concern, and that's one of the largest science groups in the world. They say that food containing GMOs or genetically modified organisms is safe to eat. Scientists elsewhere, like in the United Kingdom, Italy, France, Australia, and New Zealand, have made similar statements. If so many scientists are in favour of GMOs, why is it still such a controversial topic? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Suman Sahai, a geneticist and founder of the Gene Campaign. That's a non-profit organisation that focuses on securing food nutrition and livelihoods in India. Mark Linus is an environmentalist in the UK who used to be an opponent of GMOs but has since changed his mind. Kent Bradford is a professor of plant sciences at the University of California, Davis in the US. And in South Africa, we're joined by Heidi Swamby, a senior researcher at the African Centre for Biodiversity. Good to have you all here, everybody. Let me show you something here on my laptop. There's a restaurant chain in the US, in Canada, France, Germany, and the UK as well, called Chipotle. They have a big campaign right now, which is basically banning GMOs from their food. So we sent out our team to one of the local Chipotles in Washington, D.C. to ask the customers outside, what do they think of this? No more GMOs, apparently, in Chipotle food. Have a look.
I think they're just trying to be cool and hip and appeal to millennials and people that have nothing better to do.
Just making, a small effort to get rid of all the GMOs is really important to me.
It definitely makes me feel better, I guess, about eating here. It's healthier in some aspects.
Say, oh, we're cool and we're trying to be healthy.
It relieves me of the guilt feeling that there's no GMO in it. And I love the chips and salsa.
Genetically modified. Where's the O? What's the O? What's the O stand for?
What's the O stand for, Heidi?
Organisms,
right.
Genetically modified organisms.
Well, outside of an actual restaurant chain that is saying, look, we're not going to use GMOs, there's actually GMO on the door, the customers don't even know really what it is. If you could explain very simply what actually happens with genetically engineered foods, if we're going to be very accurate, what actually happens?
Well, it's actually a new way of breeding crops where for the first time, we can actually move genes from an unrelated species into a crop to get new traits. So this is why we call it transgenic, because for the first time we're seeing the genes of different families of organisms mixing. And it's not something that would happen in nature. It's something that has to happen in a laboratory, which is why the whole discussion about our food is now happening by scientists rather than by farmers and by consumers. It's been taken into the laboratory.
What kind of
Let me put it this way.
Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
In nature, you breed pigs with pigs and rice with rice. But with transgenics, you can, so to speak, breed a pig with rice, which means, exactly as Haiti was saying, something that doesn't happen in nature.
Now, is there GMO? Simon, let me just ask you this. I'm just trying to check that you're not, as I said, freaking our audience out. Do we have pig rice or rice pig? Did you just make that up?
No, we don't have pig rice or rice pig.
Right.
I made that up to show that what is possible with this technology.
So isn't that the problem, that people are making stuff up? And maybe, let me just go to Kent, because this is your speciality, Kent, plant sciences. Tell us two things that are actually happening so that people know that it's not plant rice that we're talking about here, or pig rice, I should say. What are we talking about?
Right. No, there are not any products that have actually transferred genes from animals to plants, at least that have been commercialized. But this idea that our genomes are somehow pure and that are not at all shared among organisms is simply not true. We know that all organisms are descended from prior existing organisms. In fact, we share a large fraction of our genes with bacteria, and we share an incredible fraction, over 80%, with other mammals. So the idea that somehow transferring a gene is somehow unnatural, it happens all the time in nature. Some of the examples of what it can do is, for example, vaccinate plants against diseases. I mean, we use vaccination. This is simply a way to use the same thing in plants, for example, to make papayas resistant to a virus that saved the Hawaiian papaya industry, to make plants resistant to insects that eat them so that we don't have to use insecticides. There are many reasons why we would do this, both within families, that is, within the same breeding population, but also, yes, to be able to take advantages of traits that are present in biology that would be beneficial in our crops.
Well, that's exactly why people online, like this person, Joe, says they don't see a problem. I gladly consume GMOs, Joe writes, as nearly every major scientific organization in the world has concluded that they are as safe and conventional and organic. This next person, though, says what we are seeing is a problem of too much speculation with no real proof. Simon, I want to go back to you on that one. Do you think that is the problem, that it's all speculation and not enough proof to prove what's really healthy or not?
No, I think there's enough proof. There are a lot of studies that have been compiled by scientists that show that a lot of damage can take place. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens sufficient numbers of times, which has been shown in safety studies with animals. And in fact, the last studies that I recall is by Judy Carman, done on pigs, a whole life cycle study, which shows that pigs that are...
So Simon has frozen there. Go ahead, Simon. Just pick up where you left off. We lost you just for a moment.
So those animals, those pigs that were fed GM feed, showed damage, showed internal damage, and there are reams of studies that have been done, including by Monsanto on its corn, which show that damage takes place. But these studies are rejected by the industry as not valid, whereas the studies that are done by scientists that support a certain viewpoint on GMOs are considered valid. So I think we are seeing a problem here about what is considered valid science and what is not. And opinions and positions that have little to do with science are informing the acceptance or rejection of such scientific data.
Let me just support that statement she just made. Let me just support that statement she just had, which is that opinions that are not science-based are influencing this debate, and the studies she cited are among those. That is, they're rejected because they're conducted in a poor way scientifically, and that's why scientists don't believe them. In contrast, a colleague of mine here at UC Davis, Alison Van Eenenum, studied the entire animal production in the U.S. since the introduction of genetically engineered crops, which are their main food product used for those animals, showing no change in their health whatsoever after the introduction of genetically modified organisms. This is an enormous sample with billions of animals over 15 years. You would think that if there really was some type of safety issue, it would have shown up.
See, Mark, if people are watching this and they're seeing, even amongst the science community, scientists are actually debating with each other, should that not be concern for the general public?
Well, the point I was going to make is that, by analogy, I've spent 15 years of my life having the same kind of argument, but actually on the issue of climate change. So the point that Suman just made is exactly the same as the one that climate denialists make, that scientists are somehow faking their data and that things aren't getting published which ought to be published and so on, as a reason to disbelieve and undermine the worldwide scientific consensus that exists amongst all the major academic institutions around the world that climate change is real. Now, what changed my mind is that the consensus is the same on the safety of genetic modification as a technique. And I didn't want to be in a position as somebody who wrote a lot about science and who wrote scientific books and who spent a lot of time trying to communicate science to the popular audience of supporting one scientific consensus on climate change and denying another on GMOs. I thought that would be inconsistent. But it's really interesting because of the politics of this issue. Those who deny the scientific consensus on climate change tend to be on the political right, like the Republican Party in the US, whereas those who deny the scientific consensus on the safety of genetic modification tend to be on the political left, as I think your other two contributors would be tonight. So it's just really interesting how science is essentially thrown out of the window for what is essentially an ideological kind of debate.
Mark, there are actually people that are agreeing with you right now. There's this Facebook comment from Heather, and she writes, it's just trendy to like non-GMO, organic everything. People think it's healthier and it's better for the environment, and really it's just marketing. So Haiti, I want to go to you on that, but if you could pick up on the point about the environment, what effects does this have on the environment?
Well, there are a lot of worries around what it could do to the environment, but to take it to kind of African agricultural systems, it's going to be broader than the effects that GMOs will have on the environment. The first effect is going to be changing African agricultural systems, which are currently very small scale, based on diversity, based on low input systems, no chemicals, because that's what works for small-scale farmers in Africa. And you want to now bring in an agricultural system that needs a lot of land, that needs a lot of chemicals, that takes a lot of water, needs fossil fuels. So already, before we even get to the problems with GMOs, we see the agricultural system that it fits in is
Jude, this is what I find extraordinary. It's almost as if there's no problem of malnutrition in subsistence agriculture in Africa. Hundreds of millions of people in this low input agriculture which you celebrate are getting such poor harvests that they're not able to feed their families. And the yield gaps are so tremendous that they get less than a 20th of the world average productivity on things like maize, because you insist that they have low productivity agriculture and that they stay trapped in poverty and trapped in subsistence. And to see, like, Mark, I don't know, urban activists insisting that poorer farmers aren't able to improve their livelihoods and aren't able to use modern technology, I just find repugnant, really, in a very moral way.
I just like after Haiti is finished telling the Africa story.
Yes. Yeah, Haiti, go ahead. And then Simon will come to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so in South Africa, people are malnourished. 1 in 4 people goes hungry in South Africa. That's 14 million people every day go hungry. And we adopted GM crops 15 years ago. So please tell me, Mark, why are we malnourished in South Africa when we've adopted GMOs and the promises haven't been fulfilled? We export
I'll answer the question very quickly, if you want to let me answer. Because poverty remains. Malnutrition is a result of poverty. Now, one of the best ways, and a lot of work in social science has shown this, to reduce poverty, particularly rural poverty, is to increase the productivity of small-scale farmers. Now, one of the ways you can do that is to improve their access to modern technologies, whether it's irrigation, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's hybrid or higher yielding crops. Only one aspect of that is GMOs. I'm not arguing it's kind of a silver bullet which is going to transform everything, but it's an important option, and farmers should be given the choice. And what really appalls me is ideological activists saying that farmers shouldn't be allowed to choose to grow better crops and to have a higher harvest and to have higher productivities. I just don't understand why that argument keeps being made.
Just give me a moment. But, Mark, sorry, Seaman, but maybe you're being a little disingenuous, Mark, because you were making this very argument several years ago. You were actually digging up fields that had GMO crops in. So how can you not understand the argument that you yourself were making a few years back?
Because it was a long time ago. This was at the very advent of the technology. I was destroying GM crops in the mid to late 1990s. I stopped by the year 2000, and by the year 2009, having read a lot more about this issue and having understood the science and also understood the dynamics of poverty reduction, I changed my position on this. And I think it's important. I know that changing your position on something is seen as like a weakness, and you should never change your mind, and you should always be basically religious. But I think it is important to change your mind when the facts change. That's what having a scientific worldview, and that's what having an evidence-based worldview is actually about.
Seaman?
I agree with you, Mark. You must be able to change your position, and I hope that you will see the growing evidence and change your position one more time to understand the risks of genetically modified foods. But having said that, all of this about malnutrition and poverty and hunger, the challenges, here I'm sitting in the central Himalayas in a little village. I mean, GMOs couldn't be further from the problems that farmers face here. Farmers face the problem here and in many other places, including South Africa, of water, of soil health. You cannot have an iron-rich crop growing in a soil that does not have iron. So you have to first attend to the things that need to be attended first, which means you have to improve the health of your soil. Your soils must be full of nutrients so that your plants can pick up those nutrients and give you healthy foods. So
all those things are important, but on the water issue specifically, there are drought-tolerant crops which can help do this. If people don't have access to water supplies, growing drought-tolerant crops can help them. So it's just one part of the picture. That's all I'm trying to say.
Without water, even a drought-tolerant crop will not grow.
Yes.
Gene Campaign has just finished testing traditional varieties of crops, and we have 14 to 20 varieties that are naturally drought-tolerant. I mean, nature has developed many options, and we should not disregard those.
So, Suman, you mentioned some of the problems that farmers face, and so that's what I want to shift to here online. This is from Ronald, who says, well, GMOs lead to the killing of many local species of plants in the country. Look at Brazil, from 543 cabbage species to 50 species, and of course, the stream can't independently verify that. But on the other hand, you have this tweet from Yusuf, who says, it really doesn't matter. GMOs are the best shot we have in combating global hunger. Organic food is good, but scarce. So can you guide us through that discrepancy right there?
Well, first of all, there are not any genetically engineered cabbages on the market anywhere. So if that reduction has happened, it just illustrates that when better varieties are offered, farmers grow them. That's what breeders do. That is, the reduction from thousands and thousands of local varieties to better varieties is what happens. So that's a natural transition. It has nothing to do with GMOs. GMOs, food plants have to have nutrients, they have to have water, all those things. But as Mark mentioned, we're working on ways to make them more nitrogen efficient, more nutrient efficient. We can actually have iron enhanced crops if they would let them be grown. Let me just say about India and small farmers, we have the example there of one crop that's been released, insect resistant cotton, which in fact 17 million growers in India grow. 90% of all the cotton grown there has, excuse me, could I finish my statement? Which has increased their incomes such that now they can afford food and they can afford to send their children to school. So as Mark mentioned, the key thing is to alleviate poverty by improving the productivity of those farmers. In addition, their health is improved because they don't have to spray insecticides to take care of the bollworm that was destroying their crops. So there are examples right in India with only one crop. That is, if we could expand this to the diversity of crops that are useful. The last thing I'll just say is that, yes, there is diversity in natural crops. That's what breeders use as well. Why does that deny us the opportunity to go ahead and expand those variation, that opportunity using modern technologies. There's no inconsistency between those two things. They're not mutually exclusive.
Suman?
I don't think the question is that of mutually exclusive. It is disregarding one resource and favoring over excessively a technology. But I'm interested that you bring up the cotton thing. If anyone who has followed BT Cotton will tell you,
and let me just explain, just for a moment, BT cotton is a cotton that's actually genetically engineered to have a toxin in it that will kill the pests that would normally destroy that crop. So that's what BT cotton is. Suman, go ahead quickly because we're almost at the end of the program.
The two things that come up very quickly in BT cotton is, one, pesticide use has not gone down. As any BT cotton farmer will tell you, their use of gaucho, which is the sucking pest pesticide, has gone up dramatically, twice and 3 times. So this is another myth
That's
needs
completely
to be put to
untrue.
rest.
Pesticide has plummeted as a result of the use of BT crops worldwide, including BT cotton. You absolutely should not say these things. You know that's factually incorrect.
No, I think you should
It's
know,
called
Mark Linus, to look
secondary
at
pests,
data.
Mark.
To look at data. Sucking pesticides are controlled by gaucho. That has gone up dramatically, as BT cotton farmers will affirm. The other thing is, how has cotton production gone up? It's gone up because of increase of acreage, not of productivity. And who is the source of this information? The former director of the Cotton Research Institute of India, who has worked with BT cotton.
All right, guess I'm going to ask you to all take it.
The acreage has gone up, but the yield per acre has also increased.
Guess I'm going to all take you, get you to take a pause, because one of the reasons that we're all together, Suman, just give me a second for a moment. We were trying to make sure that the general public who are watching this around the world got a better idea of what genetically engineered foods was about. So I don't want to dig too deeply into one specific example because I'm going to lose everybody who's just trying to get up to date with this. Let me show you something. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is a very famous scientist in the US. His speciality is astrophysicist. He's an astrophysicist and a cosmologist as well. But he had something to say about genetically engineered food, which I think is really important for this conversation. Have a listen.
What most people don't know, but they should, is that practically every food you buy in a store for consumption by humans is genetically modified food. There are no wild, seedless watermelons. There's no wild cows.
So, maybe we're arguing about something that's just technology here, Heidi, and maybe one kind of technology we like and another kind of technology we don't like, because pretty much all of our food has been genetically modified at some stage so that we can actually cultivate it. Why are we arguing, Heidi?
Well, in the early 2000s, when genetically modified crops came onto the market, the position of the United States was always that these crops or this technology is no different from the genetic modifications we know before from natural selection, and that GM is substantially equivalent to conventional varieties, and that any form of regulation and safety assessment would be seen as a trade barrier. Well, the rest of the international community disagreed with that position and went ahead and developed the International Protocol on Biosafety under the United Nations, which basically says genetically modified crops are different to conventionally bred crops. They have different safety issues. The science is very nascent. We don't know what the long-term effects will be, and we'll
everything you're saying is 20 years out of date. It's like you haven't lived with the times at all. And the other interesting thing is that the antis never talk about is different use of technologies like mutagenesis, for example, which has been used for decades beforehand to mutate crops.
You're listening to Mark Linus and Heidi Swanby, who are having a debate. We're taking the debate online. We also have Kent Bradford and Suman Sahai also taking them online as well. Meanwhile, back at the community.
This is a tweet from Oworo, who pretty much sums up that debate that was just going on. Interrupting the natural course of things has implications both immediate and long-term, health-wise and economically.
Wow, still so many questions to be answered. Are you going to go out and buy GMO food this weekend? If you're not sure, still come to the post show with us. Stream.aljazeera.com. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Hello there, welcome back to our online post show and back to our GMO conversation. We're going to pick up our conversation right where we left off. Mark, Heidi, you were debating. Can you pick that debate right up? Mark, what did you want to say back to Heidi?
Well, I'll finish my point, then I'll let Heidi finish, because I did interrupt her. I just wanted to make the point that one of the technologies which has been used perhaps earlier than transgenics is the use of mutagenesis, where
all right, so Mark, do you remember we were going to debate and educate at the same time? So just go back in that sentence.
Can I explain quickly what that is?
Yeah, please.
So if you subject the genome of a crop to radiation, you can cause more mutations, and some of those mutations can be useful. So they can confer a trait which might be better, like increased productivity or drought tolerance or better tolerance to disease, whatever. Now, mutated crops are hardly natural, and the genetic implications of that were never understood, and yet it was taken straight into the human food supply and even labeled organic. Many of today's organic rice, barley, grapefruits were originally derived via mutagenesis, and nobody ever objected to this, even though it's much less precise and much less well understood than what we're calling GM today. So I just think it's really interesting that this particular technology has been selected for all of this debate.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are worried about genetic engineering, but not worried about radiating seeds and seeing what happens when you radiate them?
Because this particular GM thing, and you can hear it in everything that Suman and Heidi said, has become a kind of lightning rod for political concerns about the kinds of agricultural systems that we see, which are very legitimate debates, but they don't really hang on a particular type of precision crop breeding. And I think that's the important issue that I'd want people to take away from this.
Mark, picking up on that point, I want to read two tweets. I just want to get these in because people are listening to what you're saying and then reacting, and I think there's still some confusion. So Debs on Twitter says, the human body is a complex machine, but it wasn't designed to break down GMOs, eat natural, and be healthy. I can see you all smiling at that one, but I want to then read this next one, who pushes back on those type of tweets. This is Doc Science, who says, I don't want to frighten you, but 60% of U.S. sugar comes from sugar beets, and virtually 100% of those are GMOs. So, Kent, you were chuckling. Well, what do you make of those?
Well, the idea that our bodies would be unable to through our evolution, be unable to digest these is quite amazing. I mean, of course, you realize that corn and potatoes came from the Western Hemisphere and were unknown in the diets of the entire Asia, Africa, Europe until they were brought there after from the 1500s. And so the idea that somehow, unless we evolved with certain crops, we'd be unable to digest them is rather insane. And again, these genetic modifications are only moving DNA and in some cases transferring proteins, and that's what our body is designed to digest. And despite the fact, in addition, that all the crops foods that have been put on the market have been through a much more rigorous safety testing than was ever done for any of the prior breeding, mutation, any other strategies that have been done. So if you want to be safe, these are the crops you should eat. They've been tested far more than any of the other so-called natural crops that are out there right now.
That has been repeated a lot about the safety and how well they've been tested. And I think we come back to the question of what kind of evidence and what kind of data is accepted when determining safety. And I think there is a skewedness there. I think part of that
over 2,000 peer-reviewed studies have looked at this, all come to the same conclusion. There's only a few outlier studies, and that's what it means to have the preponderance of evidence in science. That is, you take the preponderance of evidence that's repeated and shown again and again that the actual technology, again, you could invent certain things that might possibly be problematic, but none of those out there are. No one has an intent to make anything that would be dangerous, and the technology itself is not dangerous. Again, if you want to use this as a proxy for some other argument, that's fine, but don't blame the technology for what you see as wrong in a fruit system.
It's not a proxy for any other argument. It is a direct question of the safety testing of GMOs and of the data that exists on both sides.
How long should testing be? Suman, how long do you want testing to happen? Because I
think testing should be done honestly and transparently and in the public eye. And therefore, it is not this question of how long should it go. Yeah. I think rhetorically, you could answer it to say till as long as you can determine whether it is safe or not. But I think the important thing that has to be brought out is that data that exists that shows lack of safety is not acceptable, and that is a dangerous thing to do.
Do you
No,
eat
the reason it's not
genetically
acceptable
engineered
is
foods,
because the
Suman?
quality of the science is too
Much
low.
information
Because you've got,
on
I looked
evidence
at the, you
that
mentioned the Judy Carman study earlier. Her pig husbandry was so awful that half of the pigs were suffering from pneumonia when they were studying.
Mark, we don't know what you're... Suman, hold tight. Suman, just give me a moment. Mark, we don't know what you're talking about. Tell us what you're talking about here.
No, my apologies. At the very beginning of the show, Suman mentioned a study on pigs by someone called Judy Carman, who's based in Australia, and cited that as evidence that there was some unsafe aspect of GMOs. But the methodology of that study was so poor that you could probably find anything. I mean, essentially, their husbandry of their animals was very bad, and so they looked around and they found a few things and they blamed it on GMOs. And that's unfortunately been the case because you have these very ideologically biased people who try to get things published, which aim to show that something. It was published in a non-peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Organic Systems, which publishes a lot of crazy stuff. You should read it once.
So is there any study anywhere that says that GMOs might not be very safe? Anyone?
Well, that's accepted by the pro-GM.
Not that's been published
One at a
to an
time.
acceptable standard of science. There was a study which was retracted, which claimed to show that there were increased incidence of tumors in rats, and that was retracted because the study's methodology was too poor.
Heidi, have you seen anything that made you concerned in terms of studies?
Yes, we've commented on about 50 applications for new GM crops in South Africa over the last decade. So this is basically the information that our government relies on when they make a decision about a new GM crop is what Monsanto gives them, or whoever the GM producer is. They're the ones who do this.
And Monsanto is just an agriculture company, but a very large one.
So it's not like there's independent studies. It's whoever wants to get the permit.
There's hundreds of independent studies. They're all online. You can look at them if you want. I'll send you the links.
So what I'm talking about is the safety data that our government has been using to approve GMOs. And we've applied for 50 of those safety dossiers to date. And I can tell you that the science is shocking. I mean, the last one I looked at, which was for GM maize, which is our staple food in South Africa, people eat every day in a very unprocessed form. There was like a 12-day study done on chickens. And this is what our government is using to say that the food is safe. And then us as a public body, when we applied for the information, we get the safety dossier. About 80% of it is deleted as confidential business information. Even the references they use is deleted as confidential business information.
Well, that's poor practice. I agree with you. That should be fully transparent.
This is why Suman is saying we need transparency.
Heidi, there's actually someone who agrees. Well, I hear that Mark also agrees. There's also someone online who agrees with you. This is via Facebook. This is Elizabeth, and she says, look, it's not the science that people don't trust. It's the source. It's companies like Monsanto, who you, of course, mentioned. And of course, they're not the only ones. Elizabeth goes on to say it's companies like them who allegedly continue to put out products without transparency about the risks. So Kent, would you agree that this could be what's feeding some of this misconception?
Well, it absolutely is. But you see, again, it's a proxy. Now we're talking about Monsanto and its practices and some of these regulatory processes. What we need to get away from is the idea that the technology itself and the potential for this is limited by those few products that are made by those companies and that are sold on a mass scale. We have other products. I mentioned papaya, golden rice. While we have this discussion today, 2,000 children are going to die around the world from vitamin A deficiency. Golden rice could address that. Excuse me, could I finish?
That's another data that is pushed around.
So Suman and Heidi, allow Kent to actually talk about golden rice, and then you can tell us why you don't like it. So golden rice is a genetically engineered product that's got more vitamin A in, and it's kind of like an orangey color, like carotene.
There's no corporation involved. Farmers can save their own seed, and it would work. There's also you mentioned corn. You mentioned the small farmers in South Africa and the high percentage of corn in the diet. There's also high vitamin A, B, and C corn that's been developed. Why would that not be an advantage for a small farmer to have that corn that would give them more nutrition? Why is it simply because of the technology used that becomes evil?
Ken, that is a fantastic question. Stop for a second. Let me just see what Suman has to say to that. Why would that not be a great crop to grow? Suman?
there would be no question of it not being a great crop if all the safety data was in the public domain and the public could assess the risk and benefit and take a call on that. Unfortunately, as Heidi has said, and as all of us have been saying, the data are not available. The risk data are not available. And not wanting to make a proxy, but unfortunately, it is corporations that are denying this data. So the question must be asked, if there is nothing to fear, why is the data not being put out into the public domain? People are not idiots. They can see a risk and they can see a benefit. So put it out there and let the people decide. Let the people decide whether golden rice or whichever other crop is being promoted, whether it is actually going to be beneficial and the risks are manageable or not. But safety data becomes the crux of the decision-making process.
And this is not systems are also in the public domain. So I think really this is lapsing into. Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
We add vitamins to all kinds of foods. Why would you inherently be suspicious of the safety of enhancing the vitamin content of a food?
I
don't understand why it's an automatic.
Why do you think that engineering?
Ken, why do you think that is? Let me just show you something here, back here on my computer. We've got here opinion differences between the public and scientists. This is the US public here. So we've got 37% of US adults think that genetically modified foods are okay, and 88% of scientists think that genetically modified foods are okay. Do you think that scientists need to do more education? Is this sort of just not understanding, or is it a lack of information in the public domain? What is going on here?
Well, the problem is not a lack of information in the public domain. We have heard two advocates today who are willing to tell the story that there is something inherently dangerous about this technology, which is not true. So the reason for the discrepancy between the public opinion and the scientists is scientists know which data are valid. They work in this every day. They understand the technology, and they know that it's inherently safe. Whereas the public continues to hear these exaggerated stories and proxy arguments about how this will lead to takeovers and monopolies and so on, which are really unrelated to the technology at all. So what we're doing, we're stymieing an entire technology. We've mentioned how incredible it is we can have this conversation around the world at the same time. This is technology. We could do the same in biology for good if we could be allowed to.
I don't think
really
that all technologies are equal.
Mark,
and you cannot compare technologies.
Let me hear Mark, and then I hear Suman. Mark,
very quickly, the gap, the 51-point gap there actually was larger than the gap between public and scientists on climate change or on vaccinations or on other controversial issues. So it's really fascinating that the anti-GMO campaigners have been more successful in undermining public understanding of science, even than ExxonMobil has been on climate change. So they've done a great job really misleading the public.
Here's what I'm thinking it is, because it's something that you're actually eating, right? It's something that you're absolutely ingesting. So I think that's a little different from thinking about maybe some Pacific island somewhere that might be underwater.
Vaccines in that case. Also another controversial thing, and a lot of the anti-GMO campaigners also campaign against vaccines because it's something you're injecting into your children's bodies. And again, you have to believe, you have to trust the scientists, you have to trust the experts, essentially, that this is something which is going to actually help in terms of health outcomes.
Heidi, you just said rubbish.
I think on the question of trust the scientists is something that needs to be addressed.
Heidi, why do you say rubbish?
Well, I just don't understand why Mark keeps conflating these arguments about climate change and vaccinations and making broad statements about how activists are working on all these things. I don't see where they're relevant. I mean, I don't know anything about vaccinations. I don't work in that field. I don't understand why that argument has been brought in. It just seems to be...
I think he's talking about the gap between the public and scientists. So he's taking some other controversial issues in the science world where the public are not at one with scientists, and saying the gap between GMOs is bigger than these other issues.
I was also making the point that a lot of the anti-vaccine campaigns and anti-GMO campaigns are very linked. The Organic Consumers Association, which is one of the main anti-GMO groups in the US, also campaigns against vaccines. A lot of the money which goes into anti-GMO campaigning comes from anti-vaccine groups which have a shared interest in all things natural. You hear this word natural coming up all the time. You should only eat natural things. And it's the same. I mean, they only want to use natural health products, natural this, natural that. It's it's a complete fallacy in terms of being a rejection, really, of any kind of scientific worldview or understanding. But there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of this.
Let me just ask very quickly, Heidi and Suman, the actual science just of genetic engineering, do you have any objection to the actual science of it? Just very quickly, because I have to wrap up the show. Heidi, the science of it, do you have any worries about that?
Yes, I have definite worries about it, but one of my big worries is this idea that technology is introduced into a vacuum, and that you can separate science and politics.
So you're actually questioning the science. Suman, are you questioning the science of genetic engineering too?
Yes, questioning the science, because it will raise risks, and that is why, let us remember, regulation for this technology was demanded by scientists who understood that risks came along with potential benefits. Therefore, there is in the technology itself the potential for creating risks, which must be addressed head on and which must be dealt with.
Goodness me. Wow, this is a science debate if ever I heard one. We are not going to have it all and wrap it up in this conversation, but let me just go back to Malika and see where you want to.
Well, I will end it with this tweet from Just Bleggett, who says, at the very least, we have the right to know what's in our food, and that will lead us to a whole other show topic.
Suman, Mark, Kent and Heidi, thank you very much for your perspective on GMOs. Really appreciate you being part of the stream. And that is the end of Stream Science Week. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.